So I have a Patreon account. They're our top supporters. They've been with us since the beginning. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them, and neither would you. So one of the perks that I offer them is they get to ask a question to each guest. And so today's question is, with today's attitude towards fake news, do you think we will ever gain public knowledge of the topics covered by your books?
I think of the idea of fake news, as air quotes, entwined with the idea of strategic deception. And that is something I have written about in many of my books. You want to go to as many sources as possible. It's why I read all sides of the aisle. I will read international papers. I will watch different programs that people might otherwise think are in opposition of one another. Read things on the internet, listen to the podcasts, and then come to your own opinion about things. Because
that's great to hear. You know, I try to do that.
Strategic command, it's the most important combatant command that almost nobody has ever heard of outside of strategic command, outside of the military structure. The commander of strategic command is in charge of the nukes. He's in charge of them. He's the steward of them. There's 150,000 employees beneath him in his chain of command. When the president needs to launch nuclear weapons, he communicates with the STRATCOM commander. That's how important the STRATCOM commander is.
Okay. And you got access to him.
I did.
And you guys had a discussion about this.
We did.
How did that start?
Origins, like very much, it's what I relate to about your podcast, like his origins, like how did you wind up the commander of STRATCOM? Right? And like he wanted to be a musician. So it's like a nuclear war could be triggered by any nuclear launch at the United States, period. Right? So there are now 9 nuclear armed nations. In my scenario, I chose a rogue launch from a ballistic missile, an intercontinental ballistic missile. Just like it sounds, it can travel from one continent to the other in 30 minutes. That's an ICBM. Launch to target. 30 minutes.
That's the farthest target.
33 minutes is actually from Pyongyang. 26 minutes and 40 seconds from Moscow to the East Coast. This is specificity. It doesn't change. All the new weapon systems, that doesn't change. That is what it was when they were invented. This is just basic physics. It goes up and over the earth and down. And so then once you know that, wait, that's all it takes? This is not a 9/11 scenario where, you know, someone whispers in the president's ears, sir, the planes have hit the buildings. It's not that. This on the cover here is a thermonuclear bomb called Ivy Mike. This is the first thermonuclear bomb ever exploded in 1952 in the Marshall Islands. It was a test. Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. This is 10.4 megatons.
Wow.
Think about that scale. An atomic bomb acts as its triggering mechanism inside the bomb. I interviewed the man who drew the plans for this bomb.
No kidding.
93 now. Richard Garwin. Talk about classified. His information was so classified, no one knew he even drew the plans to the bomb. He was 24 years old when he drew them.
Are you serious? Does he regret drawing them?
I asked him that question. I said, do you wish that you hadn't drawn the plans for the thermonuclear bomb? And he said to me, after a long pause, I wish they couldn't have been drawn.
Wow.
I mean, we could do a whole podcast on what that might mean. When the EMP nuclear weapon goes off earlier than that, launched into space by North Korea disguised as a radio satellite, it takes out the entire grid. That's what an EMP exploded 300 miles over the center of the country would do. It's a colossal failure of everything electric. And so in essence, the ability to understand what anyone is doing outside what you can physically see disappears. We only know so much about history back to where people started writing it down. It's just guesswork before then. Archaeological interpretation. So man, 5000 BC, figures out how to write. So we've had a 7,000-year run of history. And once all electronics cease, in the world in which we live today, just the information goes. Everything on your computer is gone. Mm-hmm. Who writes longhand anymore besides me and a couple of others?
Not very many people.
Not very many people. So China last year was reported to have 400 nuclear weapons. This year they have 500. That is deeply concerning. Mm-hmm. The Defense Department believes that in the next 10 years, China will have 1,500. Russia is not building new nuclear weapons, allegedly. Neither are we. India and Pakistan are understood to have about 165, I think it is, each.
Okay.
But when you really drill down on it, you realize that we don't really know. The transparency from them is limited, and how much intelligence the agency has on it is anyone's guess.
What about our allies? What about UK and France?
UK, I believe, has about 200, and I'm forgetting the exact number of France right now. But the UK is interesting because they have reduced their weapons systems down to only submarines, which is really interesting.
Do you have any idea how many nuclear weapons we have?
On ready for launch status, meaning they're forward deployed, meaning they can be launched in seconds or minutes from the president's order, we have 1,770. The numbers change a little bit every year. Russia has 1,674. That says nothing about the thousands more in storage that we have ready to, that could be pulled out. So we have approximately 5,000 each. Why do we need that many nuclear weapons? You must be asking yourself.
We need that many because they have that many. And they need that many because we have that many.
Guess what the number was at the all-time high, which was in 1986?
10,000.
70,000.
70,000? Wow.
There was one point in 1957, this bomb went off in 1952. At one point, we were building, on average, 5 nuclear weapons a day. DARPA's created in 1957-58.
I can't remember what it stands for, but basically DARPA is our advanced weapons.
Yes.
It's our advanced technology weapons, correct?
Defense Advanced Research Projects
There we go.
Agency, another mouthful, DARPA. It began in 1957 after the Russians launched Sputnik. We got caught by scientific military surprise. That was like a bad thing. Herb York becomes its first science director. The reason Sputnik was so threatening, it was a satellite, the Russian satellite, the first one orbiting Earth. The reason it was threatening was because it takes a rocket to get a satellite into space. If you can put a satellite in space, pretty soon you can put a nuclear warhead on that rocket and hit the United States. That was 1957. That's where everything changed. And so Herb York wanted to know in seconds and minutes how long it took for that ICBM to get to the United States. So he hired the smartest guys in the room, the Jacobsen scientists, about which there are extraordinary many conspiracy theories. Do you know what the football is?
I do. Do you want to describe it?
The football is also known as the emergency satchel. It's this leather bag that is always with the president. Any photograph you look at the president, if you can see around him, you will see the mill aide, the military aide, who is the person assigned to carry the football 24/7, 365 with the president. Inside the football are 2 key items. One is an ability for the president's identity to be confirmed with and by those in the nuclear bunker beneath the Pentagon, which is called the National Military Command Center. So the president has like a laminated card inside his wallet known as the biscuit. It has information on it, which matches up to the information in the football that is literally a call and response. It is a verbal call and response. This is not digital. This is not biometric. It's old school. And the other important item in the football is the black book. That's not its official name, but that's what it's called. What is in the black book? Now it gets really depressing when I tell you about the interceptor missile capability. Because you will hear people say, we have like a Iron Dome. You know, we both read the news and we saw what happened when Iran lobbed missiles, including ballistic missiles, at Israel. And they were intercepted. Right? Those are short range and medium range missiles. Totally different story than trying to shoot down a long range ballistic missile, also called a strategic missile. That what I told you about, that 30-minute arc. 500 miles up in space. You're trying to shoot that down. That's where interceptor phase happens.
Don't we have some sort of space weapon that could initiate that instead of shooting up at it?
We do not. We have 44 land-based interceptor missiles. People have asked me, like, maybe we have a secret arsenal. We do not. We have 44.
How can you be so sure?
Maybe Secretary Panetta is lying to me.
Hey.
I don't think so. It was a 2-week-long program. SecDef, like the highest-ranking people in military nuclear command and control, got together and gamed out these different scenarios, according to Professor Bracken. NATO was involved. NATO wasn't involved. Tactical weapons are involved. Tactical weapons not involved. China gets involved. And what Bracken said was no matter how nuclear war begins, it only ends in nuclear Armageddon. And his exact words was that everyone left the war game very depressed. The nuclear war conundrum is so complex and tightly wound. It began with the generals and the admirals at the Pentagon in the 1950s working from an idea that nuclear war could be fought and won, which itself is insane. The original nuclear war plan against the Soviet Union that I write about in the book was going to kill 600 million people.
Wow.
600 million people. How can you have a plan like that and not call it mass extermination? Our nuclear weapons are surprisingly analog, meaning they are not digital, okay? So, for example, I learned in reporting the book that our sub-launched ballistic missiles guide to the targets by star sighting, Sean. A little panel opens, and they use the stars to guide to the target. There are other systems in place, and this stuff is very classified. But what is leading is like this ancient technology that like our hunter-gatherer ancestors used. Nuclear weapons, because they happened before the advent of the digital age, there has been a concerted effort to make sure they remain analog so that they can't be hacked. And these are assurances that I have gotten from Cyber Command. You're just taking somebody at their word at that point because the documentation is not declassified. How does AI fit into the mix? If there is indeed a giant gap on purpose between AI being able to access nuclear weapons, that is one lane of security.
What does it look like if we're hit?
A nuclear bomb explodes with a flash of light, of X-ray light, that is so powerful and hot, it is impossible to comprehend. It is 180 million degrees. That's the temperature at the center of the sun times 5.
Really?
And so the thermonuclear flash sets everything on fire, depending on the size of the bomb. In the scenario that I write, it's 3 miles out.
Is that a fact? Is that the biggest?
That's not the biggest bomb, but that is a fact. When I write about these horrific details about what happens to people in third-degree burns and wind ripping skin off people's faces, 9 miles out, limbs being ripped off, the sucking motion that happens, the blast wave that's like a bulldozer. When I write all those details, those are not out of Annie Jacobsen's imagination. Those are sourced from primary document called The Effects of Nuclear Weapons.
Does that mean North Korea's nuclear weapons would also have to fly over Russia?
North Korea's nuclear weapons fly over Russia and China, but they do not have the same technology that we have, according to my understanding of the technology, to see neither China nor Russia in real time the way that we see any ballistic missile launch anywhere on the globe.
If they do have somewhat of a capability and North Korea launches a nuke at the U.S. and it does have to fly over China and Russia, at least in our response, they would have some context and they could go, okay, we just saw one fly this way. Now we're going to see one head west. Mm-hmm. And so it wouldn't be 100% in the blind.
Mm-hmm. That is a possibility.
Now, with that being said, you're also, there would have to be some type of communications. And if we don't have communications, if we can't even get our counterpart on the phone, then...
So nuclear winter theory was originally written in 1983. Carl Sagan was an astrophysicist who became very famous in the 70s and 80s, and then he died tragically of cancer. But he became a real proponent, an anti-nuclear weapons proponent. He and a number of people wrote this theory called nuclear winter, where they modeled out what would happen after the fires stopped burning. So you have, 2,000, 3,000 nuclear weapons that have gone off. And the modeling on that suggests that after all the fires stop burning, and this is state-of-the-art climate modeling, updated since the 1983 nuclear winter theory, the fires will loft into the air 330 billion pounds of soot. Goes up into the troposphere and blocks out the sun. 70% of the sun's rays disappear. Hence nuclear winter. In the 50s, Area 51 was specifically set up by the CIA to develop the U-2 spy plane, which was this high-flying aircraft, 70,000 feet up it flew. When that was flying, it was mistaken for a UFO. When the CIA built the follow-on plane, which was called the A-12 Oxguard. Did you ever see any of the X-Men movies?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you know that plane they fly?
I do.
Right, so that's the SR-71. That's the Air Force version of it. It's a two-seater. The CIA precursor plane, which was totally secret, not declassified till 15 years ago, 20 years ago. It was a one-seater. It had a CIA pilot in it. They flew it out at Area 51. It went Mach 3 something in 1960, 2,300 miles an hour at 90,000 feet. Okay? In 1960, think of what a refrigerator looked like in 1960. Russia was so paranoid that the United States was going to launch a preemptive nuclear attack against it during the Cold War that it created a dead hand system. What is that? It's kind of like it sounds. They created a system whereby ground sensors would be able to determine nuclear bombs hitting the Russian soil. And if they weren't hearing from the nuclear command and control, so the idea being that the nuclear command and control had been taken out in this preemptive nuclear strike, the dead hand system would launch all of Russia's remaining nuclear weapons, which were like 30,000 at the time, okay? Would launch all of them without even needing a hand to push the button, hence the name the dead hand. It set up a system to launch no matter what, even if we're all dead. The idea behind it is kind of part of deterrence. Like, don't you dare launch at us, or even our own dead hand will get you.